a root canal. So yeah, my jaw's a little tired, but I don't have any more pain in my tooth because all of the nerves are gone. And he's drilling and he pulls them out, and like he's holding the thing in front of me. He goes, "Oh, there's a piece of your nerve," and I'm like,
"Don't do that.
Put me under, man." No, he was really great. So I told Dr. Eric I'd give him a shout out. And it's always weird, Joe. I don't know if you've had this experience, but when your doctors and professional sports players start to get younger than you, it's really weird, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So Eric is being 36. That's only beginning to happen to me, and he's in his late 20s, I think, early 30s. Just got married, and I'm like 7-8 years older than you. Like, please don't hurt me. but they're trained, and he does a great job. He's super. Make sure just put your hand up if you have, if you feel anything, let me know. We'll get you some more Novocaine. And then once the local wore off, it all feels, weird now. My jaw's tired. I feel like I chewed 5 bags of, beef jerky or something like that. So
we're going to talk about today. Oh, mine was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tuesdays, I just kind of stay here all day.
Yeah. You guys were cranking out shows today. I saw you had one here, one there, and everywhere in between.
Yeah, it's getting busy place down here at Youngstown Studio.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Well, first, I think we should plug the safe.
What's in there?
There is $1,100
$1,100
and AirPod Pros. Yes. And how many possibilities are left?
124, I believe.
Ooh, and it's a 3-digit code, and there are a couple of hints. So what are the hints?
All right. So first one is I got the number from a clock. The second one is partner. The third one is 1 even 2 odd. Fourth one is probably not a 0 because I didn't know if it was, even or odd. And then the last one was in the month of May, the number was guessed just in the wrong order.
Oh, okay. So you can call in 330-595-1600 and you can guess and try and win Joe's loot.
You know what I practice? Like when somebody gets it wrong, I did the want, right? I practiced the not want today just because I know it's near in
into existence.
I got my finger ready.
Yeah, gotta call in. It's good. And then we are gonna do a show on Thursday like we normally do, but then we are gonna have a special live in-person show on Friday night at 7:00 at Bridge of Hope, because Youngstown Studio is sponsoring a free movie night. There's food trucks, pony rides, carnival games, etc.
Doug is singing.
No,
he's not singing.
Negative. But we are going to do a special show, and I think are we bringing the safe with us?
Oh, we could. Yeah,
so
might
we
as
could.
Well.
And so you could come and win money in person.
You can try it in person. Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah. So 7:00 on Friday night. We'll broadcast live that night. Will we have cameras and stuff, or
the whole thing?
I'm pumped. I can't wait to see this. We were walking around doing the layout today with the staff, and it's going to be good. So that's Friday night, 7:00 at Bridge of Hope, 7580 Glenwood Avenue. Movie starts at 9. We're watching The Greatest Showman, which is going to be a ton of fun. My kids will be up dancing and jumping around.
I might be up dancing and jumping around.
Bring a lawn chair and bring some money to buy some food from the food trucks.
Yes,
so
there you go.
It's going to be good. So I actually want to talk about a critique of Think and Grow Rich, was the topic I was headed for. So we've spent a couple of our episodes talking about Think and Grow Rich. So the great critique on the book. So I went through and read all the 1-star reviews on Amazon and Google after our show last Thursday. I thought there's got to be some negative reviews to this. And so I said,
it's got its pool of critics. That's for sure.
But the vast majority is very interesting. The vast majority didn't critique the content. The vast majority, and there were some that did, but the vast majority critiqued the person. They went after him. He was a failed businessman, and he
which guy?
Napoleon Hill.
Okay, gotcha.
So they went after the author in a very kind of ad hominem, it had nothing to do with the book. So I would say probably, I didn't count them all, but probably 40% of them were just, he was just trying to make a buck. This, a bunch of baloney. He just threw a bunch of inspirational stuff together and, but he was just trying to sell a product, essentially, was the way they put it. And I read some of his life background, and he had his share of misfortune in relationships, and attempted starts of businesses and failed businesses. And so I get where some of his reputation comes across as a salesman a little bit, and where he gets that reputation. But I thought that was interesting. They didn't necessarily attack the information; they attacked the person,
Yes.
which is always super frustrating because you can attack me all day long, and the truth can still be the truth.
Right.
Now the other. I would say 50% or so were more about the content, and it was more the people that you would find that were not the critics in the sense like I tried this and it didn't work. I would say the vast majority were people that were like, this doesn't, they were just pessimistic to begin with. And so like, this doesn't work. This is stupid. Just go ahead and think about it. You'll never get anywhere. And it was like, well, you're going to say that about anything.
Right.
And so there were a few in there that I thought, oh, you know what, that, one or two in there that I was like, oh, that'd be an interesting critique to feather out through the rest of the book. Cause I guess he did a big, like almost like encyclopedia compendium is the word I was going to use, but it was like an 8-volume series called the Ladder of Success, or the Way of Success, that he wrote. And that was actually his first successful thing that brought him into some money. And he sold a bunch of books, went on speaking tours and stuff like that. And then it was almost 15 years later that he writes, Think and Grow Rich, that we've quoted a bunch. Have you, what's been the biggest critique you've heard in regards to Think and Grow Rich? Because I think some of our critics or some of the pessimists out there that may see us talking about the book or law of attraction or any of that stuff are gonna be like, and they're going to go on YouTube or they're going to Google something. They're going to find the 1-star review that, Joe Smith wrote from Timbuktu that's never done anything. And they're going to go, see, I told you it's a bunch of crap. What's the biggest one? Because you've taught the book and you said you like teaching it to skeptics. So what's the biggest critique that you've gotten that you're like, that's a tough one?
If you look at it through the spectrum, like a single dimensional spectrum, like you could take anybody's life and look at it like that. You
Sure.
could take a segment of my life and look,
100%.
Joe's an idiot, right? He doesn't know what he's doing. He had this failed thing. He made bad decisions. And why would we ever want to be like Joe? Well, the answer is you wouldn't, right? But is there information dug in the failures? Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the book is kind of layered, where even in those failures and the descriptions of the failures, like one of the biggest lessons is persistence, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a failed thing and everybody's beating up on you and you're feeling terrible about yourself, most people go and do something else. Well, guess what happens? And when you're persistent, you're like, okay, time to go again, right?
Yeah.
That's the lesson even in the failure. So I would say that it's really hard to get people to even know what multidimensional thinking is, let alone say, hey, look at this one through that spectrum.
No, that's very true. One of the things that I notice, at least in the church world, you'll have people say something like this, and I'm sure you've had this in a Think and Grow Rich discussion, but you'll have people say, well, I've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt kind of deal, tried that. And then when you get into it, they actually didn't try it. They didn't even half try it. They put a name on it and they kind of framed it like they tried it, but they never really went all in on it.
Right.
And when you get that person and you finally push them to the end of themselves, well, no, it didn't work for me, right? They want to throw their hands up. They want a reason for their incompleteness or their failure in that area. And I find for myself, even, with some of the things that I've had either short-term success in or aborted success in, you come along and you're like, oh, I did good. And then you're like, well, it didn't really work. Well, it didn't work because I actually didn't see it all the way through.
Right.
I got to a point where I said, this is as far as I'm willing to go with it. And at some level, I aborted the process. I stopped the process. I stopped the thing, because I really do believe that, if I'm going to start out building a deck, right, and I'm going to lay out the 2x4s, I'm going to set the money aside, and I'm going to put the posts in the ground, and then at some point I go, you know what, this is just too hard, and I stop. The deck's only going to be half built. And the same thing's true with whatever the principle is. You can't stop halfway. And that kind of reminds me of a scripture, Joe.
I love that part. It's one of my favorites.
In Luke 14, Jesus tells us to count the cost. He says, no one goes out to battle without first looking to see whether they can win, whether the other person, no one sets aside to build a tower without first counting the cost and making sure they can finish it, because if they start building it and they run out of money and they can't finish it, everyone will say, look at this idiot, he couldn't finish.
Right.
And we're told to count the cost when we step into those things. And so a lot of times people just step in and they only get halfway, and then everybody goes, well, it didn't work. Well, no, you just ran out of money.
Right.
Like if you would have continued to have money, it would have been built. Same thing when we talk about business, talk about relationships, you get to that halfway point, but everybody's always looking for the excuse. And so I guess maybe that's the thread that we're going to hit here is when I read those 1-star reviews, whether they attacked the author personally, whether they said what he said was stupid, or whether they said, oh, I tried that, when they really half tried it and it didn't succeed. All of them were looking for an excuse and a reason to give themselves a pass on the information. And I see this all the time in church. I see it with people in their finances. Well, budgeting works for other people, but I like to do it this way. I'm like, budgeting works for a lot of people. It's just, like, I know you think you're the anomaly, right? To everything. And sometimes we get into those places and we're like teenagers. We think we know everything, and you won't know what you don't know until you admit, I don't know.
Right.
And I would much rather humble myself and position myself in a way that says, you know what? I don't know how to see this process through. Here's somebody who's seen it through. Can you come help me out? But all of them were kind of looking for excuses to give themselves a reason to be off the hook. How do you handle that for yourself personally? Because I know sometimes for me, there's it's just a busy season. Like, there's a natural proclivity to give yourself an out. How do you not give yourself an out, Joe?
So, well, let me talk first about them, because I've found a good way of filing them away. So I study people who are in front of me, and I've studied people who are behind me, right? And both of them have a profile that is, you can tell which side. If they're ahead of you in your race, you're looking at one side of them and whatever. And the people that are behind you, it's almost like it's part of the process that they have to do and say those things because they haven't reached the level yet where they can agree with you. Though on their way, I mean, obviously, if they're putting up frictions and energies to disagree with you, then they're contemplating, and sometimes that's half
good.
of it.
That's real good.
Okay.
If somebody's making an argument, they've obviously
they're like into it at a certain point.
I think Aaron said that on Sunday when he was talking about, the kid who's making an objection says they don't care. They wouldn't make the objection that they don't care, because they actually
the indifferent ones like playing a video game. He's not worrying about what or not Napoleon Hill's doing.
So you're actually halfway there with somebody who's going to make,
and you got to let them go through that process of beating up the topic a little bit until there's nothing left to beat up, and either going to bail out and go play video games, or they're going to wonder like what you knew that they didn't in the future somewhere. So
how do you handle your excuses? How do you handle the moment where you're like, you know what, Joe gets a pass today? Like, how do you handle that? Because I know for me, like, you can go to like a rough spot and beat yourself up for giving yourself a pass and bailing out on something early. And we all have those moments. I've done it plenty with, and I've talked a lot about, my journey to find a healthy balance for my physical life. And I've done plenty of programming. I lost 70 pounds on Optavia. Now, some could argue I aborted the process, and if I would have stuck it through and gotten to the maintenance stage and gotten to the next stage, maybe that's what clicks for me. But at some point I bailed ship. You and I started out doing some keto for a little bit, and I saw some success there, and I didn't. So at some level, it was this, or, it was that. Like, I can justify myself so that I can put my head on the pillow at night and go to sleep. But at the end of the day, I still didn't achieve that which I set out for. And so I have to, at some level, own it. How do you own?
Well, let's paint the rest of the narrative. What were you expecting to be able to just go all the way straight through and have the success without any interruptions? Or is it like everything else that you need to like go in it, then recoup, then go in it some more and whatever? You might be in the pause between, the next phase. We kind of talked about this last week, where we use sort of negative energies to propel us into whatever. This is one of those deals. So if I know that I'm going to make excuses or whatever, I'm like, all right, well, Deb, we haven't fought in a little while. Like, we're just going to go, what's bothering you? Okay, let's fight about that for 30 seconds. And then we get it out of the way, and then we go on to the next thing. That's our version of it. It's not like the regular version where we let it happen haphazardly. We can poke in the ground and say, hey, what have I been really like procrastinating on right now? Let's get that out of the way. I want to procrastinate, do nothing but eat marshmallows if I want to, but I have 6 hours to do it. And then we got to get back on the horse.
Dude, you're full of wisdom today.
Thank you.
It's good. So we painted or had painted 90% of our first floor, and we've been procrastinating. We're like, it's not that bad. We'll finish up the trim here, whatever. And I said to my wife the other day, our new most of our sectional gets here. We'll be missing 2 pieces, but it's enough that they can set it up in the room, and they'll bring us the other 2 pieces in a couple weeks. We just bought an extended version of the sectional. But it's getting delivered tomorrow, and there's a piece that I need to paint where it's going to go, and I don't want to have to move it once they set it up. So I was like, Tuesday night, we have to paint after podcast. I'm coming home and we're finishing the paint. And she's like, I'll do the trim paint. You do the gray. And I'm like, all right, we're going to paint. But it's one of those things that we've been looking at it. And it's not that we don't, eat in that room or watch TV in that room. It's not that we don't see it on the wall every day, but we're kind of like, we're kind of busy and we're tired and we deserve to, like, you make those spaces, but then something has to get there, whether you put it there or whether the sectional showing up tomorrow, and you have to do that. And yeah, we did talk a little bit about motivating factors and taking the negative energy and using that. We're kind of going, all right, well, the sectional is going to be here first thing tomorrow. We got to step up and do it. So, I know for some folks, I often talk about this in counseling with people. There's a difference between the picture and the movie. The picture is, well, that happened once, maybe twice. Those, everybody makes a mistake. But when the pictures start to get streamed together and it turns into a film, then you start to build a character, you start to build a reputation, you start to build a life. How do you navigate when the excuses aren't just a picture that pop up, or when, but it starts to become, I'm sure you've had an employee or two where everything goes, well, this person did this, and if this person would have showed up on time, and if they would have called, and it's never their fault. And it becomes this film, and you're like, dude, you got to own something in your world. And I
don't push the actual ownership. It takes a while to be able to get there, but here's what I do push. I'm a 1%er, right? So I want to get 1% better. So even, and I use this example, this is what we just talked about this morning. Amazing how that happened. So let's just say you get annoyed that you have like soda cans or yesterday's dinner on the coffee table. It annoys the crap out of you, right? So when you come in the next day, you have two choices. Either say, oh, that still annoys me from yesterday and I did nothing about it. Or it still annoys me and I wasn't successful at it, but I did something that increased my chances of me not being annoyed today. If you would just do the 1%, like, what did I do? I moved the trash can closer today, or maybe I did one thing. By the time like you get super annoyed, it's almost done because of that, chopping it up in little pieces. But the problem is we get mad at ourselves for not being able to like overcome our laziness. And then it's a punitive thing. And then we get in this argument in our head and you're no closer to getting it done.
Yeah. There's that gentleman, military guy. I'm totally going to, don't remember his name, but he gave the real famous commencement speech that went viral. And he talked about get up every day and make your bed. Absolutely. And I was at Barnes & Noble the other day with our kids. We were looking for some bookends for our bookshelf, and my wife was looking for a particular book. And so right as you came in he turned that speech, I guess, into a book to sell it. But his whole point was, starting the day off with one successful thing, a little thing like making your bed sets you up, and you've already got a win under your belt and you haven't even put your feet on the floor kind of thing, which is huge. Well, if you want to call in, you should call in 330-595-1600. There's $1,100 here and AirPod Pros. You have a chance.
You know how many times Jed is trying to trick me to give him that code? He's so clever about it too. He's like, hey, is it blah, blah, blah? And I was like, and I don't give him that response, but he tries.
That's funny. So what is it? No.
You guys.
No, it's good. But seriously, you could use to be $1,100 richer, and you could put it into some sweet cryptocurrency or other stuff. Do you invest in crypto at all? They've been talking about it.
I have vouched with it when it makes sense. I have this magical little spreadsheet of where it's going to be at different segments, and when it's below where it should be, then I buy and it bubbles up, and then I sell. So I dance with it a little bit.
Yeah. So I bought in when it was like super hot back in 2017 when like Bitcoin went to the moon, and I bought in when it was at the moon and kind of deal like
it hurts your stomach a little bit when it doesn't go to the moon anymore.
Well, it tanked a little bit, and then I forgot about it. I bought in for a couple $100, and some friends were like, oh, you got to do this, got to do this. I'm like, oh, I'll give it a shot. And we bought in, we made a little bit of money. Should have gotten out like right away because it jumped up and then it tanked on the backside. But then I just kind of left it in there and forgot about it. And recently, one of these stupid Facebook ads popped up, for one of the apps. And I was like, I used to have that app. And I went in and I found my password, and I went in and I've made some money, which I was like, hey,
beautiful.
Now I just got to figure out how to transfer it out, which is, or whether to reinvest it. If my wife's watching, she's going to be like, we're doing that.
Withdrawal.
Yeah. But I mean, it wasn't like, it was like $500 and now it's like almost $3,000. So I was like,
beautiful.
Yeah. I bought like one of those little known coins. It was called XRP at the time, and is now I bought it for like 23 cents a coin, and now it's like 89 cents a coin or something like that. So I went in, I was like, it was one of my buddies was like, you gotta buy this coin. This coin's gonna be awesome. I was like, oh, I know what I'm doing. Like a dumb. So I should have lost, but now I'm like, oh, maybe I do know what I'm doing. You know? Anyway, that was a little crypto side thing there. I just saw that sitting in my car and I was like, maybe. But you know, we like to make excuses and give ourselves an out. I think regardless of whether you have $1 million or $10, we always like to, well, if the economy would have done this, if my president would have gotten elected, if the boss would have, and I think ultimately we have to own our lives. You have to own your business. You have to own your role in your family. You have to own that. When I get a husband and wife that sit down in my office and like, oh, it's not working anymore. You know, if he would just, or if she would just, and I'm like, whoa. I'm like, here's the bottom line. You can't fix them. They can't fix you. You have to own 100% of you, or this isn't going to work. If we just sit here and say, he's got to do this, he's got to do this, or she's got to do this, she's got to do that, you're never going to go anywhere. And so it really boils down to ownership. Like at the end of the day, you can have all the resources you want to lose weight, but I'm the one that's got to show up and go to the gym. I'm the one that's got to meal prep. I'm the one that's got to choose when I'm at the pizza party to not eat pizza, and you know what I mean, and to navigate those things in a healthy way. It's ultimately all on you. And people don't like that. People would rather it be on somebody else. They'd rather blame the president or the economy or whatever and be the victim. But I just don't believe that's what we're called to do. So my question to you, Joe, is how do we shift people out of that victim mentality into, hey, I can do anything? Because that's tough.
Well, that analogy you made about the film strip versus the movie, that's probably the best bet, because you could take a snapshot at any given point and be judgmental about whatever, right? But you know, if you kind of let things play out, and we'll use an example. So pick something that you get complained to about troubles people face, and we'll use that as our example to go through.
Yeah, probably the biggest thing I get people that have been married 25 to 35 years. They'll come sit in my office. The kids have moved out. They're now empty nesters, and they don't know what to do with each other because they've been married because of the kids. And so they're looking at each other, having to relearn each other all over again. And it's, well, I don't like this that he does, and I don't like that he does, and she doesn't like this. And so you get people that are on totally different pages that don't know how to live with each other, don't know how to be together. That's probably the big, I would say, surprisingly. And I'm always like, I've only been married 12 years. So, and I try and connect them with a couple that's been where they've been, because they have the scars to prove it. And they can say, well, this is what worked for us. I'm like, my kids are little, so I can tell you what I think's best. I can tell you what the Bible says, but at the end of the day, I try and connect them with somebody that's been in that spot. That's probably the biggest thing I see in counseling. And then the other stuff is all, you know, how do I overcome this bad habit? And, you know, whether that's pornography or whether that's, you know, anger. I get a lot of guys with that. Yeah, I'm just angry all the time. And most of the time I'm like, well, you're just insecure, actually. Anger comes out that way because you can't control the situation. And so you get pissed off at everybody else, and you actually just don't actually value yourself. You know, so on an individual level, we want to talk anger or, you know, addictions like pornography, alcohol, drugs, and stuff like that. And thank God for, you know, the We Do Recover show beforehand and our recovery ministry at church, because I'm able to connect some of those guys like, hey, you have some of these life altering things. These are great people to be around, and they have the scars and can walk through some of that stuff in a more ongoing basis. So
Joe's like a professional problem solver. So I don't need successes from anybody who's kind of pursuing a problem to be solved. Well, let's just say I'm sitting around with a couple, right? And all they want to do is tell you about how it's the other person's problem, and they don't really want to do anything on their end. Well, problem solver, he hasn't been hired for anything yet. Problem solver is going towards a goal that you do different things until you achieve your goal. Okay. So in the snapshot, if you do something and it didn't work out, right, you're not done. It's not time to go. You didn't solve the problem yet. Yeah. Right. But if you snapshot it and say, okay, well, I made my choice. The Hail Mary, he dropped it. Game's over. I just don't agree with that. I think it's, you know, most of the problems that I solve, I have to take a couple swings at them before, you know, that I make even progress, not solving it even, just so I can even see that there was momentum in that general direction. So I would say if you got two people who, number one, want to change each other, it's not going to work in a million.
That's a lot of people, though.
Really? You think so?
Oh, my goodness. Yes. There very rarely does a couple end up in my office for counseling or at Panera Bread with me or wherever and say, Pastor, is the problem. He needs to do this or she needs to do that. I mean, I could almost tell you what they're going to say before they say it. They'll lay out the problem, and I'm like, oh, here's her deal or here's his deal. And I let them get all the way through their stuff, and I go, all right, this is what we need to understand. You can't fix him. You can't fix her. As long as we understand that, and you're willing to work 100% on you, and you're willing to work 100% on you, we can take some ground.
So an addict comes up to you and says, listen, Doug, they got to make the drugs way harder for me to get. The problem is all it. And if you don't make it harder to get, then I'm just going to succumb to it again. You would say you're crazy, right?
So I would say with that attitude, you probably are.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, and I don't want to say this most of the time. I can almost in the first meeting tell you whether a couple's going to make it or not, just because of the verbiage and the way they're talking either about each other or towards each other. And it's not necessarily I've seen couples with total vitriol towards one another that are going to make it. And then you see other couples and I'm like, this is not good, because the language they're using already has closure to it and the emotion that's attached to it. I'm like, there's no space for any type of work. And that's some of the toughest stuff when the decision's already been made, but they're there because they have to be there. Man, that's tough. I mean, it's like going to church because you have to. Like, if you have to, don't bother. Like, I mean, that's a genuine, and I'm the pastor saying that. Like, when there's things in my life that I have to do, like, why would I want, like, if I have to do it, why bother?
Yeah. And so to answer your question, I mean, when you're an empath, there's no problem solver is not hired yet. So there's nothing that I can advise other than say, you know what, I'm probably the problem and I'm going to have to do some stuff. And I'm open to, if somebody wants to make suggestions in small ways that I could try, I'll be open to. If you can say that, then there's a start. Yeah.
Well, I think when you have somebody who wants to make excuses and they've made you the problem, let's say the boss is always the issue and you have an employee. One of the things that I do that I find very disarming is I try and empathize, and I empathize by saying, you know what, I don't do everything right. Here's 3 or 4 things. And if you went to my wife, she could probably give you a whole list of things I don't do right. So if you could just tell me what I could do better. And that totally flips the script on them, because they've been complaining behind your back or complaining to whoever. And, 100%, like I don't get everything right. And I'm not lying to them. I honestly believe that I don't get everything right. And that allows for them to go, oh, because for whatever reason, bosses, management, pastors, people get put on a pedestal. Like, you're supposed to have all the answers, Joe. And people don't realize you're making most of this up as you go. As pastor, as pastor, I tell people all the time, my favorite answer is, I don't know how we're going to do that, but I just know we're supposed to do that. Or I'm not quite sure what the answer is there, but we'll figure it out. And I know that for some people that need the exactness and need to know that that's been there, I don't know how all that's going to play out. Like, for instance, we went into our big building project, and we did a $500,000 renovation on the church. And, I have a goal to pay off the debt of the church here shortly. But we're running into a problem. The last 3 weeks, we've only had 4 to 5 parking spaces. So now I only did half the parking lot. We did 300, spots or so. And now I'm going to have to do another 200 spots before I pay down. I didn't know I was going to have to do that. Like, I had a couple of thoughts and projects, but it's presented. All right, we have a problem. So the way to solve it is we're going to have to raise funds and pave the rest of the parking lot. Sure, would I like to raise funds and pay down the debt, but that doesn't help us because people are going to be parking in the mud if we don't do that. So, but those sort of things, and being a problem solver, I think when you were talking about that, I thought of my tooth. So interestingly enough, like I said at the top of the show, I had a root canal today, but the first time I went in, I was just in pain when I had cold liquids on the left side. And so, dentist looked at it and poked around a little bit and found where the tension. He goes, well, actually, I think you might have an infection in your gums. He goes, let me put you on an antibiotic and put you on. And so I took the antibiotic, and it got, I'd say 60% better, but it wasn't all the way gone. And then it started to progressively get worse again. I'm like, oh no. So I call, and my dentist happened to be on vacation. It happened to be a family practice. So his dad was there, and I've seen his dad before. And dad came in, checked it out. And he says, he goes, the way your tooth's laying, we're probably going to have to put a crown on it. You already got a pretty big filling on that one, and it's just sitting funny, and you're probably getting stuff stuck down there. And that's what's causing the problem. So the first problem, they took a stab at it and said, well, it might be this. That didn't work. Came back to the table. He said, well, let's get an x-ray and look at this. And they had an x-ray from before, and they looked at it. I don't see any decay in there. We'll look at it. Why don't you come back? We'll schedule the crown. So I go in today for the crown, and he's looking at everything, and I'm like, look, it's gotten a lot worse. Like, I can feel it in my jaw. Like, it's really hurting. Like, if it's an infection, like, it's in my bones. Like, at this point, like, it's hurting. And he had checked me for the infection the second time. And then he starts getting into shape the crown. And as soon as he took off a piece of my old filling, he's like, he goes, I don't know how this didn't show up on the x-ray. I don't know if your filling hit it, but you have some decay that got underneath your filling, it looks like, and it's pretty down in there. I'm going to try and drill it out and see if we can't do this. But by the time he got in there drilling, he got so close to the roots, he's like, I got to take another x-ray, and we might have to do a root canal. I took another x-ray, then had to do a root canal. I did not go in there for a root canal, but it took 3 stabs at the same problem. Now, I don't have any pain in my tooth right now. My jaw's a little tired, but I have to go back and have them set up for the crown and then put the crown on. So I have 2 more visits, and then I'm going to have a nice bill at the end of this. But at the end of the day, to your problem solving thing, he could have made an excuse and be like, well, I gave you the amoxicillin, it didn't work. Good luck. He could have done that. Right. There's nothing on the x-ray for us to look at. Well, it wasn't showing there, but he said, you know what, maybe it's this, we're going to do that. And in their attempts to solve the problem, they came to the solution, and now I have no pain. I'm very thankful for. But a lot of us do that. We run into one wall, and I tried it and it didn't work, and then we just throw our hands up. Well, I didn't have an option because this is my mouth, and it was in a lot of pain. And I think for some of us, we hit that wall, and because we're maybe not feeling the pain anymore, or we've disregarded, or we've stuffed it, or we've moved it, we're like, well, that didn't really work, and this doesn't really hurt as much as it did the first time. So I'm going to move on and do X or Y or Z. But I think that's true to your problem solving.
And each step, it might not necessarily got you in a better position, but
right.
it revealed more things that gave you even a better insight into where you were headed. And going back to the law of attraction in the beginning, single dimensional people really do struggle with that. But the whole purpose of how the writing is done, it's meant to illustrate the fact that the depth, if you're not looking for depth, right, you're going to miss the actual how-to in that book.
Yeah. I think with whether it's Think and Grow Rich or The Secret or any of those kind of law of attraction books, what they're trying to get you to do is to look past your current situation and scenario, past the physical, what's right in front of you, and see just a little bit past that. And most of us struggle to see beyond our current circumstances and situation. We look at our finances, go, well, I can't start a business, or I can't afford to do that. And immediately it's cut off, rather than being able to see the end product and being so passionate about where you're headed that I'd pay any price to do that. What do you mean it's not possible? Well, I'll go sell lemonade, till I have.
All right, let's have philosophical. I believe that we basically we did explain these types of people, and I started off by saying that they're just behind us and they'll get caught up. I think that they're so necessary. They're like a foundation for the level that's on top of us, right? Or on we're on top of them. So for instance, let's just say everybody did law of attraction. What would the world be like?
Yeah. Right.
There has to be the detractors in order for what we do to actually function, right?
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. It reminds me, John Maxwell book, 360-Degree Leadership. He says, there's always somebody above you, beside you, and beneath you. Now, in that case, he's talking about organizationally pulling people up to your level, or working alongside, or getting mentored. But I think it's the same thing with law of attraction, with faith, with church. We say, if you got saved last week, you're in a different spot than the person who isn't yet. And if you've been here 30 years, you should be in a different spot. Now, just because you've been here 30 years doesn't mean you're mature by any means. But you have those elements where you have some of those people that are ahead, and some of those people are right along where you're at, and some of those people are behind. And we have responsibilities to each of them. And I think that's the fun part of a show like ours, is we try and take some of these principles and communicate them to some of the people that are behind, to say, hey, here's a hand up. Why don't you come up to where we're at? And then even some folks that are at where we're at going, hey, this is what I'm navigating through right now. Oh, okay, you could do this, you could try this. And then bringing other people on that have been successful and are able to bring a different kind of viewpoint to our.
Yeah. And don't think this is ridicule. Literally, I know you're going to be behind me, and I know you're going to be blaming my shoes for me being where it is. And I have to ignore that and let you just go through that, sort that out on your own without wanting to intervene and correct you. That's the biggest part, is that I had to wants to like give you the answer, and that's not what you need. You do not need the answer.
That is so true. And in most of my coaching sessions, when I have somebody, we have several that are studying to be pastors right now. There's so many times where I'm like, if I just told them to do this, like this would help them so much, but they have to figure it out on their own.
Right.
And so I have to lead them to the right questions, not just give them the answers, which is so
and it's so hard because it would be made easier.
I know. And I'm watching them bang their head against
but
the wall,
where they would be right back at the beginning.
Exactly.
Because they would have not arrived there through their own means.
Or it would put me in a spot that I would not be. I end up being in the spot of the Lord, and I'm not comfortable with that. Like, he needs to be your source. And so, yeah, you can come to me and I can say, this is what I've done, but the end of the day, like, you have to figure this out. You have to navigate what that looks like. I can give you some mechanics, but the relationship and all of that, the depth of it, you have to discover a lot of that for yourself. And that's probably true in business too. Like, you can read a business
100%.
book and everything else, but the best way to learn is to go out and start a business and flop and figure it out. And,
yeah, it's painful and it hurts, and you don't want to do that. And you want to take it serious, and you don't want to blame other people. And because you get to own it. And that's the thing. Like, you get to own it.
I mean, mentors are good because they let you can learn from their mistakes, which is nice, and you don't have to make some of those mistakes, which is good. But some mistakes, I just feel like you have to make on your own.
I feel like I'm a perpetual 13-year-old that somebody could tell me today, "Hey, Joe, if you do that," I'm like, I want to see. Let's see if that is me.
You were there with the fork in the outlet, weren't you?
Yes, that was me. I was like, I believe you, but I want to see if it applies to me.
Well, I was not that way. I distinctly remember in high school, my parents were really good at this. I would come to them and say, hey, I could do option A, B, and C. And I was 15 going on 45. So I would come and say, hey, here's all the things that, I could do. And my mom was really great. She would go, well, what do you think of the benefits of A? Say, what do you think of the distractions? And she just walked me through decision-making process. And then I'd be like, well, what do you think I should do? She goes, well, what do you think you should do? And it was always pushed back in that way. And then when I was in high school, there were times I'd say, I'm going to do this. And she would say, no, you're not. This is what we're going to do. This is why that's a terrible decision. And she would make the decision for me because I was still a kid and I didn't necessarily know better. But by the time I got into college, she would let me make the decision. There'd be times where she would tell me, I think you should go with choice A. And I'd be like, Mom told me A, I'm going with C, regardless.
Ooh,
and rebel, I know. But inevitably it would blow up in my face exactly the way she said. And I would come back and be like, I should have listened to you about that. So I ended up, by the time I was graduating college, I would call my mom and be like, hey, what should I do about this? And she'd be like, we have option A. I'm like, I know, but what would you pick? I've watched this train wreck a couple of times and I know you know how to make, and it's not with every decision, but certain decisions, obviously she's been a CFO at a law firm and she's got a degree in finance. So there's certain things that I'm like, when we were doing our mortgage on the house, like I called her, she works at Remax, and I was like, do you know what this is? Because I don't understand what this is. And, she had to ask somebody because it was a law that was in Ohio and she wasn't familiar with it. But, some of those things, like I'm like, I don't even know what to do with that. Like, sure, yeah, I'll just sign on the dotted line. But when you have somebody like that, for me, it happens to be my mom, it's great. But you have those mentors that try and help you not make some of those mistakes. When I've had to make staff changes, or we've had to rearrange and do some big bold moves at the church, I've gotten to tap into people like Bishop Thomas, who pastored for 43 years and saw a lot of success. And I got to say, well, how do I do this? How do I do this well? How do I not burn bridges as I do this? How do we navigate some of this stuff? And sometimes you're good at it and sometimes you're not. And you can take their advice to a point, but at some point I have to pull the trigger. I got to step up and make the decision. And I think the same thing's true in business mentoring, or in, whether I'm sitting there with a couple in my office, like I can say, this is what I think you should do. This is probably the best approach to this, but they got to go home and execute it. You could sit down with a business consultant. They could say, Joe, I would do these 5 things. This would be the best for your company. And you could say, thank you, but I'm going this way, and you're going to deal with those consequences, or you're going to execute on those 5 things. And whether they're right or wrong, it's not on them, it's on you.
Right. You know what I'm thankful for? That I don't think you and I would have gotten along had we met earlier in my life and your life. I think we were so much oil and water. I think you would have hated me or been afraid of me, one of the two. It's just so cool that like two opposites like we are meet up at a proper time where there's like the only point in my time that we could ever be friends. That's amazing.
Sam and I were just having this conversation. I was this morning or last night, and I was saying to her, she was like, do you ever feel awkward? That's the question she asked me. I was like, no. And she's like, never. And I was like, I could sit in a room with the president of the United States. And I was like, I don't ever feel like I don't belong in a room. Like, I know there are some rooms I don't belong in. It's not a pride thing, but I'm comfortable in my own skin. So like when I walk into that room, whether I'm sitting there with, a dignitary or whatever, or whether I'm meeting, a guy in recovery at the Palms for the first time, like neither of those do I have to feel any different, because I'm still me.
Right.
Whether they hate me, whether they both love me, like I need to be comfortable with me. And so I actually think that regardless of when we would have met, now maybe I think I would have hacked you and figured you out.
You think so?
I think so.
Okay.
I think there's not many people that I look back and I'm like, oh, I couldn't I want to avoid them.
But you would have filed me away as some kind of like dangerous,
we wouldn't have
useless
had the same,
mechanism.
We wouldn't have had the same relationship.
Right, you're right.
Because we're both, you're right. It was at just the right time or in the right season. But I think at some level, I find the ability to put people in my life however they fit at the time. I don't necessarily need them to fit perfectly, but I just believe every person's inherently valuable. And so I want to make room in my life for them. And sometimes that burns me. But most of the time I find it really enriching and rewarding. And, sometimes 10 years down the road, you run into somebody and you realize that just a little nudge and a little spark from you changed everything. And that's super cool. Just
an observation. I just thought that was pretty cool. Because I enjoy this kind of stuff. I back and forth, and the conversations about history, the stories that are scary, and the successes that were hidden now. I love it.
Yeah. No, and I think that's the fun of our chemistry. I think that's the fun of the show. I think that'll be the fun stuff when we do some speaking and different things like that. There's a certain energy that you carry that I don't. And there's a certain energy that I carry that you don't. And so in that, Bishop says it this way, just stay in your lane. Like I know who I am, so I get to stay in that lane. I don't have to be business guru. That's not who I am. I don't have to be spreadsheet man. That's not who I am. But Joe doesn't have to be super people guy. That's not who he is. He gets to be Joe. He gets to be spreadsheet man, science man, experiment man. He's going to figure it out, and he's going to change the world that way. He's not going to change the world by being pastor.
That's right.
That's not who you are. So
nice. Well stated.
Look at that. Either way, own your lane. That's the point of this. Yeah, don't make excuses.
Why doesn't anybody want that $1,100? I find that ridiculous.
Honey, if you're listening right now, call in.
And your name is, let's make up a pseudonym or some kind of name so that.
Yeah, no, somebody should call in. We have about 2 minutes we'll give you to call in here. And I see a bunch of people watching, so you should call in 330-595-1600. It's $1,100 in AirPod Pros.
And by the way, Michael, I saw that you had supported the show. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, 99 stars.
Yeah,
what are stars?
They translate into like pennies. So that's like $1 that was given or whatever. So yeah,
that's super cool.
Pretty cool. So thank you, Michael.
Thank you. That's awesome. You should give pennies too. Stars. That's what they are, stars. That's really cool. Well, we'll be back here on Thursday, and then Friday night, special show, Bridge of Hope, 7:00, 7580 Glenwood Avenue, food trucks, carnival games, free movie night. It's going to be a great time.
Doug is dancing. I am singing.
Hosted by Youngstown Studio. Joe and Doug show will be there live. You can guess for the money live that night, and it's going to be a great time. So we'll see you Thursday back here at 6:00, and then Friday at 7:00.
Thank you for listening to this show on Youngstown Studio. If you like our programming, we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow our Facebook page, or subscribe to your favorite podcast platform like iTunes or Spotify. This is original Youngstown content, and we would appreciate you sharing the videos and the word about us. Thank you.